Lord Mayor, friends, ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome to the Mansion House, to this very special May Day occasion, and it's my great pleasure, on behalf of the NUJ and the Maher family, to welcome everyone here, and to remember our friend, our comrade, our colleague, Mary Maher. I have one duty to do before we begin, and that is to point out the exits on the left and on the right. Mary would prefer you to take the left path. The Lord Mayor has been gracious in providing this facility to us today, and we're grateful for that. I thank the Lord Mayor now because she is leaving us at 1:30, and normally I would regard that as an incredible discourtesy, but given that is to fulfil May Day obligations, I'm delighted, in a good way. And now I want to introduce Mary, as if she needed an introduction in this audience, Mary's great friend, Olivia O'Leary.
Thank you, Seamus, and welcome everybody to this gathering, remembering our colleague and friend Mary Maher. The pandemic, of course, stopped us mourning her and remembering her when she died, and now we have the chance to do that with her family, which is a terrific privilege, and how appropriate that it should be on May Day, because there isn't one worker sitting here today whose life wasn't made better by Mary Maher. My job here is to keep the show on the road and not to slow it down. There's just a few short things that I want to say before I read from what was Mary's letter, setting out how she wanted her death to be marked. I just wanted to say how much I miss that voice. Mary talked rapidly. You'll hear it every time you overhear Bonnie, which I do in the choir all the time. She talked with that dry, clipped Chicago accent, and the wisecracks came so fast that you were out the door before you realised what she'd actually said. And there was a famous occasion on which one rather spoiled colleague with which Mary had an argument stormed out of the place forever, grabbing her designer handbag under her arm and declaring in a loud voice, "I will not work with that Chicago gun moll." Of course, we were all delighted to work with somebody we never regarded as a gun moll, because she was a convent-educated barrister's daughter with impeccable good manners and terrific warmth. But there were things that she believed in, like feminism and socialism, and she lived her life according to those beliefs, and she used that wonderful, distinctive voice of hers to promote them. And because of the bravery of people like Mary Maher and Mary Cummins and Nell McCafferty and Mary Kenny, my generation of women found that the walls of the male citadel had been breached for us. RTE gave me my job because Mary and her colleagues went on to the Late Late Show and said, "Why have you not got one woman's voice doing either news or serious current affairs?" She shamed them into it. And as a result, my generation and those who came after us were able to go on to become political reporters and interviewers and correspondents and newspaper editors, as with Geraldine Kennedy, and indeed directors general of RTE like D. Forbes. So thank you, Mary Maher. Now I'm going to read extracts from the letter that Mary wrote about how she wanted her death to be marked. And even though it's me reading it, you can still hear Mary's voice, because in her writing she had that gift. I don't want a funeral, really, but if it's felt that there should be one, I'd rather a Catholic one. I understand why people who grew up in Ireland, where the church has had so much power and used it so badly, might want to be humanists. But I grew up in the USA, where the WASPs had all the power, and the Catholics and the Jews were the scum. Not as, quote unquote, scummy as blacks, of course, but scum just the same. When my father waved goodbye to his pals, saying, "Keep the faith," he wasn't urging them to go to Mass on Sunday and eat fish on Friday. He was saying, "Be loyal to your tribe." I wish to honour my ancestors by sticking with the tribe. What I do want is a jolly memorial service, meaning a session with lots of song and music. That way you can pick a really good day for the hoolie, and you have. I'd very much like my Employment Appeals Tribunal colleagues to be invited and to feel at ease if they come, because some of the finest people I know I met there, employer members and lawyers, as well as the union nominees. And then Mary goes on, I have been a communist at heart since I was 10 years old. It was the time of the Cold War, and all American teachers were into denouncing Russia. Mother Mary Ignatius of the Holy Child Order told us that children in communist Russia had no personal property of their own. All property was shared in common. Why she thought this would shock a class full of Irish Catholic kids from large families who were used to sharing, I don't know. As well as that, the Holy Child nuns made a big deal of sharing in their community. So I stood up and I asked, why was sharing wrong in Russia, but right for the nuns here? She answered, we share for the love of God, but in Russia, people don't even believe in God. I asked, would the Russians be all right to share everything if they believed in God? And Mother Mary Ignatius told me to sit down. That was enough. I was reinforced in my conviction that this was the goal years later when I heard from each according to ability and to each according to need. Maybe that day will come. Maybe I'll see you all again. I hope so. I'm ruling nothing out. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Alison Gilliland, and of course she's allowed us to use this historic room for the event Remembering Mary. She's a member of the Labour Party and a former equality officer with the Irish National Teachers Organisation. So she's a woman in the Mary Maher mould, and we're honoured to have her as part of this event today. Would you please welcome Lord Mayor Alison Gilliland.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and thank you all for being here today. It is a real honour for me, it really is, to welcome you all today for this very special event, to welcome Mary's family, daughters Maeve and Nora, sister Bonnie, grandsons Niall, Kit and Finn, and the extended members of the Maher and Geraghty family, including all who have travelled from America. Welcome also to her former colleagues and her friends also joining us here, and everyone joining online from around the world. I think this small group gathered here today is really representative of the many strands of Mary's incredible life. I welcome in particular her trade union colleagues, Patricia King, General Secretary of Congress of Trade Unions, Siobhan Holloman Coherlach of the Irish Executive of the NUJ Council, Seamus Dooley, of course you all know, who leads a strong NUJ delegation. As a journalist, you know, Mary covered many historic meetings in the Oak Room and in the Round Room next door. So it's really fitting that we are here today to remember her. And it was really simple decision for me. And I think May Day is a wonderful day to have it on. I think she would really appreciate that. She had an acute sense of history and a great sense of occasion. And not only did she report on events, but she was also part of the history. This building, part of the history of our city, of our country, and particularly part of our social history. She studied at Barrett College and then worked on the society desk of the Chicago Tribune in the early 1960s before moving to Dublin. At the time, so-called women's pages traditionally focused on cooking, shopping, homemaking, and initially had no interest for her. According to the anthology Changing the Times, she remembered how real reporters patronised such pages in Chicago. But the late Donald Foley, then news editor of the Irish Times, had different ideas. He suggested Women First, a page with, and I quote, serious articles, scathing social attacks and biting satire. This had real appeal. For Mary, her role in the Irish Times combined the real reporter bit with a concerted focus on the wrongs of women, plus useful factual information for women whose work happened to be running a home. Other newspapers followed her lead, And according to Mary, when the Irish women's liberation movement burst upon us in 1969, the women's pages became a forum that otherwise would not have been there. Mary was one of the founder members of the Irish women's liberation movement, and it's estimated that over 1,000 people attended an event next door in the Round Room where she spoke. And indeed, she went on to inspire thousands and thousands more, including myself, other female trade unionist colleagues, and women still dedicated to the fight for gender equality and parity of esteem. She played a pivotal role in drafting the IWLM manifesto, Chains or Change, which still resonates today with its emphasis on equality in law, in education, health, housing and social welfare. And I have the very great privilege of being presented with Chains or Change by one of Mary's IWLM colleagues here with us today, Rosita Sweetman. Also here today are the fabulous Maureen Johnson, author, trade unionist, and Maureen de Burka, who won us the right for women to sit on juries. Trailblazing women, indeed, decades and decades ago, whose influence and inspiration still remain with us today. Mary always insisted that the IWLM was a collective and that no one person should claim credit for shaping that agenda. In that spirit, it's appropriate to salute all those sisters who helped shape a better Ireland and made it easier for this generation of women to take their place in public life, in politics, in trade unionism, in civic society, and in the media. Looking back at the 70s for a special feature in Weekly Hibernia published in October 1980, Nell McCafferty described the founders of the women's movement in Ireland as a rip-roaring coalition of lesbians, left-wingers and hip heterosexuals who fought and sought discrimination high and low, invading sanctuaries as diverse as the 40-foot all-male swimming hole and the all-male headquarters of the Federated Union of Employers. Mary was part of that coalition, of course, part of a distinguished group of women and journalists who helped shape the women's movement in Ireland. She made a sustained and strategic contribution to the development of equality in Ireland through her journalism, her activism, and in particular, her trade unionism. She was the first Irish Times woman to return to work after marriage and the first to get paid maternity leave. An ardent trade unionist, she became the first mother or shop steward at the chapel at the paper. In 2014, she became an NUJ Member of Honour. Mary was also an author and playwright and received many awards throughout her career, including one from the National Gay Federation for above-average journalism. According to her friend Maeve Binchy, Mary had, and I quote, the great advantage of not knowing the sacred cows, and by the time she did know, she had courage not to care about them. She has been described as the first woman of the NUJ in Ireland, but as we know, her influence extended beyond her own union or profession of journalism. As noted in the Member of Honour citation at the NUJ Delegate Conference held in Eastbourne, April 2014, Mary Maher's career, and I quote, was marked by a number of firsts. Records set and broken, glass ceilings smashed by dint of hard work, determination, good humour, and dedication to her union. Today, we celebrate Mary as a trade unionist, as an author, as a singer, and one of the most influential journalists and women in Ireland over 4 decades. She was, of course, a wonderfully devoted mother and grandmother, long-term resident of her adopted Ranelagh. Mary declined to take credit for her achievements, preferring to encourage a new generation of activists to carry on the struggle for equality. She never gave up that struggle and forever warned against complacency. Indeed, in her retirement, she served on the Employment Appeals Tribunal and served on the Standing Orders Committee of the Congress of Trade Unions. I believe she took special pride in the marriage equality referendum and in the direct involvement of her daughters and grandson in that campaign. You'll note the invitation card for this event features a picture of Mary on the Glen bus at the Pride rally celebrating the referendum bus. She cherished that moment as she looked across at the rainbow flag flying high over the Garden of Remembrance. One of the reasons she was so proud of the campaign in which she played a part was the inclusive nature of that Yes Equality banner. Throughout her life, Mary built bridges of understanding and solidarity, not least in her trade union movement, but across the organisation and civil societies that she was involved in. It is my privilege to remember her here today among her family and friends at this very special event. Thank you.
Mary loved music and, as we all know, sang herself, and we're going to hear plenty of music today. So right now, a song that absolutely reflects the sort of struggles that Mary was involved in for equality. It's Jimmy Jordan of the Clay Club who's going to sing Hard Times Come Again No More.
Let us pause in life's pleasures and count its many tears, as we all sing sorrow with the poor. Though the voices be silent, their pleading looks would say, oh, hard times come again no more. It's sad, the sigh of the weary, singing hard times come again no more. Many times you have lingered all around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. Though we seek mirth and music bright and gay, there a fail falls there fainting at the door. Though their voices be silent, their pleading looks would say, oh, hard times come again no more. It sound the sigh of the weary, singing hard times come again no more. Many times you have lingered all around my cabin door, singing hard times come again no more. It's a sound that is wafted across the ocean wide. It's a sound that is washed to the shore. It's a dirge that is heard all around the family grave, singing hard times come again no more. It's sad, the sigh of the weary, singing hard times come again no more. Many times you have lingered all around my cabin door, singing hard times come again no more. Once more. It's the sound, the sigh of the weary, singing hard times come again no more. Many times you have lingered all around my cabin door, singing hard times come again no more. Good luck, Mary.
Thanks, Jimmy. Mary would have loved that. Her sister Bonnie and herself used to sing a lovely duet. I remember it from Maeve Binchy's 60th birthday party. And it was the haunting McGarrigle sisters' song, Talk to Me of Mendocino. And we heard it at so many Irish Times and other gatherings. But we're going to hear now a song that Mary's mother and Bonnie's mother loved. It's Thomas Moore's Oft in the Stilly Night, and it's sung by Sean O'Harcon from the Clay Club, the traditional Irish music club which meets at Liberty Hall, right?
Which Mary had found.
Oft in the stilly night, ere slumber's chains hath bound me, fond memories bring the light of all the days around me, the smiles, the tears of boyhood's years, the words of love then spoken, the eyes that shone now dimmed and gone, the cheerful hearts now broken. Thus in the stilly night, ere slumber's chains have bound me, sad memories bring the light of all the days around me. When I remember all the friends so linked together, I've seen around me fall like leaves in wintry weather. I feel like one who treads alone some banquet hall and deserted, whose lights are dead, whose garlands fled, and all but he departed. Thus in the stilly night, ere slumber's chain hath bound me, fond memories bring the light of all the days around me.
As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, a thousand mill lofts grey, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we mother them again. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead, go crying through our singing their ancient song for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits new. Yes, it is bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, marching, we bring the greater days. For the rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses.
It's great to have a running commentary from Seamus Dooley, like she was terrified of that horse. She was? Okay. Yeah. I'm sure there's hardly a dry eye in the house. And thank you so much, Sean O'Harcon. I just thought that was absolutely stunning and sweet, that rendering of Philistine. Well, Mary said she wanted lots of music when she was remembered, so her family have made sure that today. And we now have the gathered talents of the family in this Maher Geraghty ensemble singing 2 songs in memory of Mary, and I will let them introduce them themselves.
Introduce them by saying these songs need no introduction.
Only
I think this old room has witnessed many scenes, but I think that the warmth and the life-giving happiness of that song will stay up there in those rafters for a long time. Thank you very much. Mary was an enthusiastic member of the National Union of Journalists all her life, and that matters. It's very easy in any job to be careerist and to follow one's own career. People like Mary actually gave time to their fellow workers, and an awful lot of time and effort goes into union work, and nobody gets thanked for it. But it made a difference to all of our lives. She was the first mother of the chapel in any media organisation in Ireland. So now we're going to hear the Irish Secretary of the NUJ, Seamus Dooley, who was Mary's very close friend. He will now remember Mary Maher, the trailblazer.
Thank you very much. Before I do, I want to do something that Nora neglected to do, and that is to introduce and to thank Nora, Nora not just for the song, but also for the work. I tend to go for gentle persuasion, and Nora was a tyrant in preparing that group, but it was absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much. That was really, really wonderful. I think you will know Maeve and Nora and Kate and Neon. You didn't know Katie, who represented the American wing of the family, forcefully. Friends, Mary spoke often and with great affection of the former deputy editor of the Irish Times. And when I mentioned Bruce Williamson's name, I know Williamson's name, there'll be a flicker of recognition through some of the people here. Bruce called Mary aside one day after she wrote an article which began, "Words cannot describe." And he called her in and he said, "Mary, dear Mary, words cannot describe. If you think that, you're in the wrong job." Now, I don't want to risk disturbing the distinguished ghost of Bruce Williamson by suggesting that the English language does not have sufficient words to describe the woman that we have come here today to celebrate, but also to mourn, because we all miss her enormously. So instead, I know that many of you know that Mary had a habit of making up verses and songs and paraphrasing songs. And she had thousands of them, and she wanted each and every one of them sang at her funeral. Bonnie actually has an entire MP3 player, remember those, of songs that Mary wanted at her funeral. One of them was The Gorgeous City of Mullingar. All this suspends me, the theme transcends me. My muse's powers are too weak by far. It would take Catullus, likewise Tibullus, to sing the praises of Mary Maher. After the first COVID-19 lockdown, I visited Mary in Shanna Bay Nursing Home in Bray. And as I entered, the kindly nurse, one of many who looked after Mary so well, introduced this masked figure and says, "This is your friend, Seamus Dooley." And Mary looked up and down and looked at me with those penetrating, curious eyes and loudly proclaimed in terms which would have gladdened Bruce Williamson's poetic heart, "I know Seamus Dooley, and whomever this may be, this is not he." After I, like the red shadow in the desert song, removed the mask and revealed myself further, Mary, ever the strategist, looked at the nurse and said, "You keep him talking to distract him, and I'll go up and I'll ring the NUJ and I'll tell him they have an imposter in their midst." And you know, at that time, despite the painful fog of confusion which none of us ever understand about dementia, I got a glimpse of the Mary that we all knew and loved so well. To Maeve and to Nora, she was a loving mother who took challenges in her stride, sometimes looked for them, respected their life choices and reared them to be like her, independent and sometimes impossibly stubborn women. And she admired them for that. To Neon, Kit and Finn, Dandy, as she was known, was a devoted grandmother who read stories, organised the most fantastic puppet shows, I used to go to them, made up nonsense verse, and gave them incredible street cred as having the coolest granny in Ranelagh. President Higgins, and in his letter, and he cannot be here today, he sends apologies, and the Lord Mayor both referred to Mary's multiple legacies. In tracing the slow march towards equality, we see, as the Lord Mayor has referenced, Mary's footprint on every path. The fruit of her labours are evident in shops, in offices, in factories, in newsrooms, and it is true to say, in statutes and statutory instruments. Few journalists have had a more sustained impact on the social, economic and political landscape by dint of their journalism and their activism. Mary is rightly celebrated for her contribution as a member of the Irish Women's Liberation Movement, and there are many here who could give direct testimony to her achievement as a journalist, activist and as a trade unionist. And it would be an impertinence of me as a man to lecture this room on Mary's importance to the Irish Women's Liberation Movement. Let's also celebrate her role in giving a voice to other minorities, her pioneering work in covering travellers, her work as a champion of consumer rights, often forgot about, and her dogged support for gay rights, which earned her the award that the Lord Mayor referenced and which she was so proud of for above-average journalism. There was a plaque that used to hang over her office and it got lost in the move to Tara Street, which was Mary's plaque saying above-average journalism. It's sometimes forgotten that in the late 60s, travellers then were not known as travellers, they were known as itinerants, and there was a movement for itinerant resettlement. And Mary went down to Galway. The first wave of the NIMBYism, not in my backyard, was a place where there were objections to itinerant resettlement. And everyone refused to talk to her. Everyone except one politician, and that was Michael D Higgins. And that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship with Michael D Higgins. And that friendship, I think, is reflected in his movie Message. Mary's career was rooted in a passionate commitment to social justice. And those were values inherited from James and Bonnie Maher. On one occasion, in November 1966, Mary arranged for her father on a visit to Ireland to visit De Valera in Arsenouch. The Mahers have a proud tradition, Fenian stock, Tipperary nationalist stock, and the boss, the chief, was delighted to meet. But Mary often chortled as she recalled how Deb's stoic countenance transformed in what Mary described on one occasion as that of an elderly gentleman sucking upon a particularly bitter lemon. As James, in return to the question, replied to the question, "What do you think of Ireland?" said, and you can hear Mary saying it, "Well, I'm very disappointed. I wasn't expecting to see so much poverty on the streets of Dublin." And it was a tone of, "Was it for this?" And Deb just did not know what to say. Mary's knowledge and appreciation of politics stemmed from her Chicago Democratic Party background. She had, as all of you know, an acute political acumen. She was an unapologetic socialist, and she often wished that left-wing parties would apply some of the organisational strategies of Richard Daley or Sean Lemass in their quest for power. And she used to get really frustrated when left parties celebrated being on the losing side but having had a good campaign. Mary believed that the only good campaign was a campaign you won. In retirement, she regarded herself as a fossil, and she urged researchers to talk to the current generation of activists instead of looking to the past. And she didn't, she would frequently turn away researchers because and it wasn't out of discourtesy. She'd go on the piss with them, she'd buy them copies, she'd tell them stories, but she kept saying, talk to the future, don't always talk to me. But she was wrong on that, because the study of fossils is essential. And it's a valuable exercise. And from Mary's work, we learn so much about the evolution of modern Ireland. I think the wonderful Paddy Behan, who many people remember, Paddy was an old-style trade unionist in SIPTU, who on one occasion, Joe O'Toole, was lecturing journalists to modernise and use laptops, if you don't be minding, at meetings. Paddy stood up and said, President, what we need is more marching on the streets and less of that laptop dancing. But Paddy on one occasion talked to me about Mary, and he was involved in the Dublin Housing Action Committee, and he said some of your crowd, meaning the NUJ, came up to have a look. There was a difference with Mary Maher because she said to listen. Mary was a great listener, not just as a journalist, but as a lover of music and song. She loved the old Irish ballads, first heard on 78 records in the parlour of her Chicago home. Unlike so many aficionados, including some gathered here, she was utterly unsnobbish. And she made no bones about liking teaching, teaching McFadden to waltz, Molly Brannigan, or the Tumbledown Shack in Athlone. But she also adored Gershwin, the American Songbook, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Paul Robeson, the McGarrigle sisters, Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, Tom Lear, the Inkspots, traditional Irish music, Gregorian chant, choral music, the list goes on. And in the last 20 years, through my late partner, she acquired an interest in electronica and obscure punk. I can't say I was grateful for that particular devotion. Mary was open to all musical experiences. Sorry, I'll read that again. Mary was almost open to all experiences. She drew the line at Dublin in the rare old times. She once seriously suggested that if someone sung Dublin in the rare old times in Liberty Hall, that they should be banned from the Tay Club. And her logic was that she had covered the poverty that her father told Deb about, and it was neither romantic nostalgia or deserving of celebration. While Donald Foley, and it's great to have some of Donald's family here today, while Donald may have tempted Mary away from America with a job in the Irish Times, it was actually a visit to the aforementioned gorgeous city of Mullingar that consummated Mary's love affair with Irish music when she visited the first Fleadh na hÉireann. She absolutely adored the haunting voice of Dolly McMahon, the versatility of Frank Hart, the sheer integrity of Luke Kelly. And she learned from those sources, and she developed, of course, a rich style and repertoire of her own. She read widely. She loved bridge, dolls' houses, wine, entertaining, meetings of her friends known as the Committee of Ancients, reunions with formal chapel officers and sub-editors in the Irish Times, famously dubbed by Nora these gatherings as the Continuity Irish Times. Her trips with Gordon and Maeve Binchy and the Binchy clan were both liquid and legendary. She would be immensely proud of this civic honour bestowed by a Labour mayor, a trade unionist and a woman who stands on the shoulders of the sisters who took their first steps here. She'd be proud of the fact that represented here today is Siobhan Hollyman, the Cathaoirleach of the Irish Executive of the NUJ, Deirdre Belden, the Deputy Editor of the Irish Times, and Ivana Bacik, the leader of the Labour Party. And I think Mary would say we must have been doing something right. She would be proud that her union decided to mark her death in music and song on this, her favourite day of the year. She would have been proud as well of the very warm celebration of a Mass this morning, where the priest called for critical voices in the Catholic Church and stressed the importance of being heard in the manner in which Mary Maher allowed people to be heard, because she did believe that the tribe, as she called it, was important. She would be overjoyed at the inauguration of the Irish Times bursary, so fittingly announced this week, and deeply appreciative of the work of all involved in what is an exciting new initiative aimed at promoting inclusion and diversity. Mary would want me to thank the members of the Clay Club for their wonderful music, and to thank you, Olivia, for your graceful presence. She would have been both annoyed and pleased at the stunning pictorial tribute edited by our NUJ colleague, Fran McNulty of RTE, and in his absence I want to acknowledge it's a really lovely, lovely tribute to Mary. She would want to thank all of you for your attendance, but she would warn you that the day is not over yet and that you are welcome to attend the Play Club every Wednesday or once a month in order to carry on the tradition. But in the meantime, you have to go to Parnell Square today. I talked to Maeve and Nora about how Mary could best be summed up, and Maeve borrowed a phrase from Maya Angelou, which I think perfectly captures the essence of this remarkable woman whom we were all privileged to know. To describe my mother would be to write about a hurricane in its perfect power, or the climbing, falling colours of a rainbow. Thank you, Mary Maher, the NUJ's Rainbow Warrior.
Thanks for that, Seamus. I don't know whether she would prefer to be referred to as a fossil or the coolest granny in Ranelagh. She was one of the most talented journalists I ever knew. She couldn't write a dull piece if she tried. And she had that American impatience with guff, as my Uncle Paddy in San Francisco used to say, "Give me a break." To the fight for Irish women's freedom, she brought the wider knowledge she had of the global feminist struggle, but she had a wider political view. She was a socialist. She lived in a modest way. She lived what she believed in, and what she believed in was the dignity and worth of all people. She leaves an empty place in the lives of her friends and her colleagues, and that's nothing to the loss that her family and particularly her children and grandchildren must still be feeling today. It's been a privilege to be here to remember Mary with all of them today. So thanks for everybody for coming, and we're going to end our memorial event today with a song which could be, of course, applied to Mary herself. It's sung by Sally Corr, accompanied by Noel Pocock, and it's Union Maid.